Uncertainty allows the possibility of pursuing something that would otherwise be excluded because held to be known to not result in a certain outcome wanted. The doubt or the uncertainty leaves you with options. Each of them may be possible, and you may not be clear which one is more probable than another. It leaves you free to exercise on the one that you find more attractive, and your exercise in that direction may well reveal more doubt or less as you proceed. So you will now have experienced pursuing a goal that you would not otherwise have pursued, perhaps. Or you find you're pursuing a goal that becomes feasible because of your pursuit of it. And of course, you can imagine various independent agents pursuing various goals that would not individually be feasible, given certainty for the other actors, becomes feasible given the other actors are also now embarked on a path that would not, in its narrow self, they would have risked entering into because it would have required others to be doing the uncertain as well. So uncertainty greatly increases the choice from which an actor will feel free to embark on a different route, different goals, and it gives an incredible variety now to the experience of life because other actors are acting and relating within the context of whichever of the goals you take. So, you find that what would otherwise not be feasible becomes feasible because of several players being unsure as to the outcomes of certain possible actions that they can make. So I'm not sure if you'll dance with me, and you're not sure if I will dance with you. Because of uncertainty, it's possible that you will. I do it, and you do it, because we both want a certain outcome, and because we're both doing it, I ask you to dance, and you say yes. If you'd have been clear of the situation that I wasn't going to be there, and you weren't going to be there, because we were clear that the other would not say yes, but then we would have both stayed at home. I wouldn't have crossed the floor to ask you to dance. I think what this is indicating is that there needs to be uncertainty and the exercise of some sort of belief or trust that something could be the case, enough to make you move forward and try it and see. And of course, because of uncertainty, it could well be that it will work. If we think now of outlying possibilities where, let's say that the actual probability of something is low, that I find the right house, and that you are selling the right house, I might simply say, well, this doesn't look terribly likely outcome. Multiply the two probabilities together. I think I'd give it a miss. If on the other hand you want this to happen very much, you might just think it's worth a try. It's the low probability of gaining this is better than the high probability of gaining something that's so mediocre to me otherwise. So I look, and you similarly might feel that although the probability of finding someone who wants such an unusual property is low, you'll still do it. So, let's take, for instance, a more real case that I may have experienced, which is I advertise for someone to lodge in the house. They must be non-drinkers, non-smokers, vegetarian, and preferably loving God. So I set about looking for such because I value this very much. You equally happen to be the unusual person that fits that description. You, because of the importance of such to you, are looking for such a place. And therefore you are looking and I am advertising, and the result is we meet up and something's happened that's rather good. If I hadn't had what might be called the faith to search, even though the probability is low, then in both cases, both the prospective tenant and the prospective landlord would not have acted. So, uncertainty itself gives the opportunity to exercise faith. You could say faith and trust are only applicable in situations of uncertainty. If you know, then it's not a case of faith and trust, is it? It's, you know, for sure. You know. And uncertainty, even uncertainty about the probability of something, so that you just don't know how probable it is, which is the case for most things. You can't really judge the probability of, for instance, this lady loving you forever, and she can't judge the probability of you loving her forever, and you both ideally would want this at a certain stage in your life when you meet, you're starry-eyed with each other, and let me just change this a sec. And so you're both willing to put faith into a situation that has a seemingly low probability, but is greatly valued from your point of view. So you risk it. Both of you risk it. And of course, if you don't both risk it, well, it can't happen, can it? Because if nobody actually commits, obviously you're not going to have a commitment for life. You won't have a commitment for 2 minutes, will you? So, we find that uncertainty, far from being a menace, a handicap, actually gives opportunity to much greater possibility for miracles, if you like. You know, if you don't ask, you don't get. So you ask. You might be wasting your time, or you might have to ask an awful lot. You don't know. You've no idea of the probability. So you launch forth. And at any stage, you don't know if further asking will be successful or not. But because of your importunity, because of your pressing, doors seem to open. Or if you like, you look long enough to net even a low probability. Perhaps fortuitously, because on average you should have had to look much, much longer, but you were fortunate enough in getting it earlier. Or from a religious point of view, God does answer according to how much you really want, you really press, because that's his pleasure to do so, to meet true desires. Really think, if it's really important to you, well, then I want to meet it, don't I? Because I love and care for you. We now find then that independent agents in the field together that are able to exercise faith, willing to exercise faith, to put faith into it, and go for an outcome which has seemingly not great likelihood of coming off perhaps, except through an awful lot of effort and searching and input. They're willing now to do that, and the input may be surprisingly low, or maybe impossibly high. It may turn out to be just not feasible, You just are not gifted in playing the piano because you don't have enough fingers or hands or something. There are likely limits. Except, of course, in an age of technology where the, artificial limb could be greatly improved, presumably, I don't know. There are circumstances where it could become feasible, so we don't actually know the probability. I usually look at uncertainty from a different point of view because I've hit it from a longer time now of being religiously orientated to the possibility of the probability of God and so on. And I'm interested in uncertainty in that, in the context, it gives the individual a freedom to choose God or not. If you knew for certain God did or did not exist, well, it would be straightforward, wouldn't it? Where you're not sure, you start to think, well, which is the outcome I would prefer? I don't know the probability of each, so that's not necessarily steering it. Of course, if you're absolutely convinced God can't exist or God definitely exists, well, you're not in an uncertainty situation. But if you are in perhaps the more usual situation of just not knowing, you're now in a position to say, well, which would I prefer? Well, I prefer this outcome to that. Assuming your view of God is an all-powerful and loving being that in particular includes loving you, then, or will love you in certain achievable circumstances, then you choose, and you would choose to back the option of loving God, especially because if God didn't exist, well, you probably haven't lost much because life's short and a bit meaningless, isn't it? When you're dead, and life is vanishing quickly. Whereas if you pursue the line that God does exist, well, it gives meaning to your life in the meantime, so you can suffer all sorts of difficulties without too much suffering. You can experience many difficulties, but it's not suffering because it all has meaning for you. And of course, there's a possibility that God does exist at the end of it, in which case, my goodness, you're so glad you did the right thing. So, from my perspective, in the uncertainty situation, with the uncertainty comes the possibility of faith, and perhaps faith is cardinal in God's creativity too. In some sense, if God exists, he's brought about the impossible of all this universe from nothing, assuming that's the God we're considering, a God that did start with nothing and simply brought all that we know into existence, including ourselves. did he face uncertainty in the possibility of that? If he did, how did he handle it? If he didn't, why did he create uncertainty? Well, for a good reason. Either way, to be part of his family looks as though we need to understand the role of uncertainty as regards creativity. We are a creative being, and if we don't understand uncertainty in our objectives, planning, purposing, if we don't understand the role of uncertainty, then we're going to muck up our purposing, aren't we? And therefore greatly limit our creativity. Now, religions don't typically press, or Buddhism presses the uncertainty of existence. You know, everything changes, and true reality is not the reality you're looking at anyway. It's quite different to that. You know, it's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that it's not the way it appears. So their uncertainty is sort of cardinal, or, you know, fundamental, taken to be a fact of life. Religions, on the other hand, normally theological religions, stress the importance of faith and trust, which is not quite the same thing as certainty. It's that good will come about if you have faith and trust. And if you don't, then you're likely to get the random outcomes of a world of no ultimate meaning, you know, satanic sort of chaos. So faith is absolutely cardinal as regards successfully living in a world of what would otherwise be uncertainty, and a dilemma as to how to choose. You know, the pessimistic person looks at the world and says, well, there's so much evil, I'd better, you know, take the cash and let the credit go. I'd better just pursue as much pleasure as I can now and settle for that. The presence of uncertainty then makes the possibility of all sorts of pursuits also that might end in dead ends. So we might now practice taking harmful drugs because there's a possibility we can handle it, and we find at some point that, oh, we can't. It looks as though we might have gone beyond the point of no return. Desperately we try in uncertainty to get out of it, and we happen to come across some solution that does get us out of it. You know, we run into Jeff who casts it out, or we run into some professional practice that schools us out of it, you know, for the nation's sake. And we've now experienced, and we now have, if you like, an abhorrence, a loathing for being trapped in such an addiction again. So we've now experienced the reality of something we would not have otherwise chosen in certainty, perhaps, if we'd have had an absolute clear knowledge of what happens with, you know, no uncertainty of such. If uncertainty then gives us experience that we would not otherwise have, that is necessary to function well in different dimension, we'll call it God's family, the kingdom of heaven, then uncertainty is a useful, valuable tool. It's a teaching tool in the classroom, isn't it? If, on the other hand, the uncertainty is something fundamental to the universe, but for God, or some sense, uncertainty is necessarily a quality or a feature of nothing. Nothing you could say is highly probable, but perhaps nothing has not even a dimension of probability. It's just nothing. What does probability mean in dimensions where there is just nothing? Not even the dimension itself. Nothing means nothing, doesn't it? It's like the problem of space. How can light travel across nothing? There's nothing there to travel across. Does that mean there's something? No, there doesn't seem to be. There seems to be a star here and a star there and nothing between. And so one starts to realize that perhaps the nothing in between is not quite nothing at all. It's like an extremely tenuous substance, or some potential field, force field, and gravitational fields and all the rest of it, and light passing through it, has to be some substance. If it's got nothing to pass through, it has to be a substance itself. And we're not even clear what passing through means. Why should nothing have a dimension that gives it the possibility of passing through it? So, if uncertainty is necessarily a feature of nothing, a bit like chaos, if nothing has the feature of uniformly nothing, then it's not a chaos. And it's definable. For a start, it's, for instance, clear of matter, say. It's clear of anything else that we've identified as existing. And having done that, of course, we're not sure as it's clear of everything, only what we can identify as what we take to be existence of something. So if uncertainty is something that God has overcome, then of course the practice of faith, he's overcome it in creating his family and his universe. Here, for instance, the material universe, the schoolroom that we're in. If he's overcome uncertainty to do it, then of course, if we are, in a sense, to be like him, we must experience also overcoming uncertainty. And of course, faith and trust is highly likely, looks odds on, so to speak, to be something in the order of that, isn't it? You exercise faith in the face of uncertainty and you can get a good outcome in certain circumstances. So we have a great acceptance of uncertainty now, in that it exists. It's a blessing to us in that it leaves an option of the possibility of a menu where some things, all the things are uncertain and some things are more important than others to us. In other words, our values now start to impose or determine our choice in the uncertainty. And if we're the sort of person that doesn't think this is likely to be a good outcome, if we're not at all clear of the probabilities, then we start to become paralyzed. I don't go to lift my hand up to scratch my head because the uncertainty of knowing whether I can do it, whether it will relieve the irritation, whether I will hurt myself or whether it will be a blessing. And if I'm totally without confidence on all these matters, do I just lay there paralyzed? Not quite paralyzed, but simply I've lost the volition, the willingness to lift my arm and see. So, an essential feature of a creative being, at least in this classroom of the material world that we experience, an essential feature is this volition this willingness to do and to practice despite the uncertainty of what the outcome would be. We visualize an outcome, we visualize some sort of likelihood of it being possible or not, and then we juggle these two together and we decide, shall I give it a try? Do I like it so much that it's worth to give it a try, even though it doesn't look terribly likely? You know, in the case of me, it didn't look at all likely I'd be academic, that I'd get to university. I mean, goodness gracious, I was average in a very, very average school, not your elite or your grammar school streams and so on. So it was unlikely. But somehow the fancy had taken me, and somehow I'd experienced just from a little test, you know, you're likely to be asked 5 or 10 questions on the geography lesson or the history lesson. What are those questions likely to be? Well, these are the things we're supposed to know and study. I'll learn them off. Literally, I'll learn the list. If I get the right questions, I'll manage it. If I don't, well, I won't, will I? But these are the ones that seem more likely. And do you see, there's this hope that's driving you. Hope is a combination, isn't it, of wanting something and wanting it enough to make it determine your volition, your choice. You know, against hope weighs probability of failure, doesn't it, or anticipation of possible failure. And some people are overwhelmed by that, and others are not. They steam on in hope, and they seem to achieve the unlikely. They've got so much hope that they might go bankrupt 2 or 3 times, but still they achieve the unlikely, and they end up, I don't know, very successful. Right. So, we're blessed by uncertainty in that it gives us a practice in which to learn the value of hope, faith, that willingness to try and see. Without it, your creativity will be stunted. How could you have the creativity of God? If he also is faced with uncertainty. Now, this is not a feature we normally like to attribute to God. We like to say, oh, well, he knows all things. Well, perhaps he does, in the sense that he can achieve, given what is that he has, he can achieve in his mind you achieving a certain outcome. And that outcome is going to be achieved if you also, like him, become able to create. You know, you can't be like him except you're also a creator. And to achieve that, there's this exercise, this willingness to embrace hope and faith. And of course we direct our faith in the religious sense to God, you know, to the supreme deity. It's our trust in him that he will come to the rescue even if things are impossible, won't necessarily answer it in quite the way we hoped, but it'll be better because he's a loving parent and very able. And really, I don't need God to be all powerful, do I? I mean, you just have to be wonderfully powerful and loving, and well, that's the way to go, isn't it? I'm not looking for completeness, I'm just looking for enough. And, you know, a magnificently able God that loves you, wow, that'll do me. And if there's one that's more able and more loving, more truly loving, well, yes, I would choose that. And I'm seeking to follow what I understand to be very powerful, very loving God. That'll do me. Well, I've arrived at a conclusion that if uncertainty exists here in the classroom, it's because the overcoming of it, the difficulty of uncertainty, overcoming it, is crucial to adult life in the kingdom of heaven. I suspect, therefore, that uncertainty is a fundamental thing that God is able to handle. And he handles it by a willingness to try what would otherwise be impossible. Given his experience and willingness, he has a great facility to achieve what would not otherwise be achieved. And we therefore say he's all-powerful. And in some sense we mean, yes, he is all-powerful against uncertainty. He makes more probable, feasible, and brings about that which is to any lesser being just not on, it's not going to work, not possible. So, is God infinitely able to cope with uncertainty? Perhaps he has achieved that level, and perhaps we need to achieve something of that level. And that's why uncertainty is allowed quite a measure in the classroom we're in, so that we learn in our handling it. Well, we learn quite simply that faith and trust is the answer, and how to move within what is safe, reasonably safe faith and trust. Come to know what to put trust and faith in and what not to. For instance, I don't put my faith in simply having a miracle. I actually put my faith and trust in the best outcome, which I think is a miracle of healing, say at the moment, but I'm not sure. I have enough faith to be able to put it to God, and enough faith then to think, right, I leave it with him. I don't want to push it so hard that I'm actually going to be experiencing something that's not for the best. I'd rather have for the best. On the other hand, I am meant to exercise a certain degree of sovereignty. I'm meant to be creative and to make inroads into the unknown, as I see it. We don't want dangerous inroads where I insist on a certain outcome, even though God knows that that's definitely not the best way to go. And he has to modify it greatly in order to make it acceptable in his will, thank goodness, and does. And there's no point in me battling with God, he knows what's best, and I'm insisting I want what's best from my narrow point of view. I mean, that would be crazy, wouldn't it? So, we have a faith that becomes something that embraces the unknown. It embraces what we take to be a benevolence and a wonderfulness of God, to modify and steer what is reasonable faith and what isn't. Reasonable faith now becomes to trust in him rather than any specific outcome. We trust in his judgment better than ours. But we do trust in his judgment. We don't simply say, we don't trust our own, so we abandon all requests, all faith, all creativity. No, we now create and purpose and deal with uncertainty, but within the context of trusting a loving, well, we might hypothesize all-powerful God or just extremely powerful God. But, of course, an all-powerful God that's not loving, that would be frightening. That wouldn't be too good, would it? An all-loving God that had no power at all, well, we're not clear that if you have no power at all, you have any existence anyway, so it's not clear that would be meaningful either, is it? So we put our trust in a very powerful God that's very loving and, if you like, the best possible, beyond what we can imagine. And we start to put our faith in that. And we then still have faith and trust in various goals and outcomes, but within the context of our God being such. And then we see if it works. If it doesn't work, you revise, don't you? You have a rethink. If on the other hand you find it doesn't work, but then suddenly it does spectacularly, or like the world finds, well, it doesn't seem to work, but I've not really practiced it, and then suddenly you get a miracle in your life, wow, that can have a startling effect and impact on your faith and life, and everything turns around. You're a new creation, you've got new values, you're different, your whole lifestyle changes. So, we start to understand something of the role of faith in the face of uncertainty. And we embark on, and we have from birth up, of course, we embark on an experience of handling uncertainty, having a certain degree of trust, faith, or volition sufficient to actually do something and act. And our personality, if you like, who we are, our values start to develop accordingly. Thank you, Heavenly Father.